to embellish a suitcase. Woo!
Hi Kiki readers, Lindsey here at Kiki today to go over how to embellish a suitcase. So maybe you read that article in Kiki that talks about turning an old suitcase into something fun. Well, we're going to go over how I did some of those things today, and you can, maybe put those into practice at home on your own.
Okay, first thing, anytime you're working with a non-traditional painting surface, especially found objects or things that are old, you're going to need to clean it. Paint does not stick to dirt very well. So you can use water or Windex, but you just want to wipe down the surface so that you have any kind of dust or grime taken off. So now that your surface is clean, you're also going to want to sand it. And don't use like the really thick sandpaper that's really gritty. You want to use the finer sandpaper that you would use for smoothing surfaces. This is just going to create a little bit of a rougher surface for the primer to stick to, and it'll just smooth everything out and make it better to start with. Now, if you can get your hands on some painter's tape, which is the blue tape seen here, or a very light non-sticky masking tape that you want to use to tape off areas that you don't want to get paint on it while you're working. So like zippers and closures and just anything that you want to stay crisp and clean, you're going to cover that with tape, and we'll take that off later. Okay, now that you've prepared your surface, we're going to go ahead and prime it. And primer is what holds paint to an object. So even if you were painting a canvas, you would prime the canvas before you paint on it. And you can see here that I'm using what's called gesso, which is what most painters use to prime a canvas with. I actually think for your suitcase, or if you were doing something else that was going to use a lot of wear and tear, like a chair or something, I would use house primer. For example, like the brand Kilz, K-I-L-Z. It's just a little bit stronger. I think it'll take a beating a little bit more, so that might be better for you. Now you can see I actually have a little brush so that I can do details first, just like you would do the trimming of a room in a house. Just do the trim or the edges of your suitcase that you want to be more careful with, or the handle, with a tiny brush, and then you can go in later with a bigger brush. And it's better for just about anything to do at least 2 layers of primer. So you'll paint a layer of primer, and then you'll take that same sandpaper and you'll just smooth it out a little bit. So just roughly go over it with your hand. And with sandpaper, it's actually not about how hard you press, but how quickly you move your hand. So quickly move your hand with the sandpaper over your primed surface after it's dry, and then do another layer. But make sure it's completely dry before sanding. And you'll actually go ahead and sand it again after your second layer of paint. And again, this is just really quick. It's just to kind of smooth the surface down a little bit. So now that you've primed and sanded, and then primed and sanded, you can go ahead and paint any way you want. I would recommend using water-based paints just because they dry quicker, but now that you've primed it, you could use oil-based paints if you wanted to. If you're doing a flat, solid color like I'm doing, then you want to do the same process where you paint and sand and paint and sand. If you wanted to paint a scene, say like a sky with birds and mountains, then I would paint the whole thing blue and then sand it, and then paint your mountains and your birds and do some more blue. But don't sand it after you've done your scene, because that will actually compromise the things that you've painted. I'm going to show you how to embellish your suitcase with spray glue and Mod Podge, and this could work for fabric or for photos or paper or anything kind of flat. So you're going to first spray the surface with the spray glue and just kind of wait 1 or 2 seconds for it to get a little bit sticky. And then you're going to apply whatever it is that you want on your suitcase to the sticky part. And you don't have to spray the whole part that you want covered. Just spray a little bit at a time. Do you see how I'm spraying the side and sticking it, and then spraying a little bit more, and then sticking it to it? Otherwise the glue will dry faster than you're able to put down the fabric or paper or pictures that you are trying to get around. So the spot here where my strap is connected to the suitcase, I'm actually going to trim a little chunk out of my fabric that I have so that it fits around that spot. So you may have to make adjustments there, but you can always glue more fabric around where you cut, or you can glue something else. But in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and trim that up a little bit. Okay, so you're just going to go ahead and wherever you want it to end, just make sure you do a little bit of extra amount of spray glue just to finish off where you want your fabric or photos to be. And then where I cut that hole so that my strap would fit, I'm just going to glue some extra pieces of lace around that part just so, because I like the way that that looks better. So you can always, I mean, that glue is really awesome. You can just spray it and stick on whatever you want, wherever you want it. So now that I have my fabric secured in place, I'm going to take Mod Podge and I'm going to really saturate that fabric, or like I said, if you had a photo, just really put a hard coating of Mod Podge over it. I mean, you don't want it dripping off, but you want a strong amount of Mod Podge on there. And you can use a detail brush like we did before, or a bigger brush, but you want it just a really strong coating because that's actually going to function as your sealer too. And if you, instead of using Mod Podge, you could also use like a Krylon or a satin finish to spray on, but I think Mod Podge will do a good job if you're gonna be moving this around a lot. Mod Podge will keep it kind of strong and keep it together. So you're just gonna want to cover that. Okay, for this suitcase, I was going for a kind of Parisian theme, so I actually cut some shapes out of black fabric that just kind of said Paris to me. So, you know, here I have the scalloped outline, and I also did a fleur-de-lis, and I did a chandelier. So what I did for that is I drew what I wanted on a piece of paper, and then I pinned that piece of paper to the fabric, and I cut the paper and the fabric at the same time. So for this process, I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the lace just now, which I did on both sides of the zipper, if you can see that. Is I'm just going to spray a little bit of glue and then put it on, and spray a little bit of glue and put it on, and then I'm going to cover it with Mod Podge. And the thing that's cool about this spray glue is it's actually sticky for, you know, a minute or so. So if you look at it and it's not in the right place, you can actually move it around a little bit before you're really committing it to that spot. But once you have it where you want it, that's when you're going to cover it with a heavy coat of Mod Podge like you did before. Now, I'm showing you mostly how to embellish a suitcase with fabric, but maybe you saw in Kiki that some of the suitcases were painted. So if you just want to paint a lot of details on your suitcase with acrylic paint, you can do that too, and just, you know, make sure that you use enough paint that you can cover all the spots that you wanted. And when you're finished, you can either seal it with Mod Podge or like some kind of a satin or glossy finish that you can buy in the store that you would use for like any kind of a water-based paint for a house. I like to use Krylon satin finish. That's a good one. If you want to cover your suitcase with some glitter, you're going to do a similar process as the fabric. You would spray a hefty amount of spray glue and make sure your suitcase is like laying flat where you want that glitter. And then you're going to cover it with glitter, whatever shape you decided. And then you're going to let that dry for a good 20 minutes, I'd say. And then when it seems to be pretty stuck on there, you're going to shake off the extra glitter that's on there. And then you want to do a really strong amount of Mod Podge or a finish that you have been using for your suitcase. Just really saturate that glitter so it doesn't come off. And you can do that for whatever you're using, paper, photos, beads. So just make sure that it's really glued on there so that if you move your suitcase around, it's not going to fall off. So I'm going to glue some beads onto the handle, and maybe you saw on some of the other suitcases there was glitter on the handle or there was rope on the handle. In this video I'm going to use hot glue, which is semi-sturdy if you're using this for decoration. If you actually are planning to travel with this suitcase, I would use a stronger glue, maybe something more like epoxy or Gorilla Glue, something that's really going to be strong and hold your beads or decoration in place. And if you're using a strong glue like that, you might want to ask an adult or someone older than you just for guidance, just because if it's a strong glue and it's chemicals, you just want to be careful with anything. So I'm just going to go ahead and put some hot glue around my handle and then just lay the beads where I want them to be. So I'm going to go ahead and put ribbon around the handle also, and I'm going to do that the same way that I did all the other fabric application to the suitcase. So I'm just going to use some spray glue a little bit at a time, and I'm going to stick it around and then cover it with Mod Podge. So that's just a really good way to go about putting things on your suitcase. Okay, so at this point you should be pretty much done, but make sure that your suitcase is completely dry. So the paint and the Mod Podge or a sealer that you used, make sure that you rub your hand over it and nothing comes off on your hand. And you can go ahead and peel off the tape that we put on in the beginning to protect areas like zippers or closures that you didn't want to get paint on it. And I always think that this part is the really fun part because it's almost the big reveal of your finished product. Well, this wraps up our tutorial on how to embellish a suitcase. Good luck on your own projects at home. And if you take a couple of pictures, make sure you send them to submissions@kikimag.com. And also check back at kikimag.com often to see what cool stuff we have on our website or maybe more fun tutorials to do. All right, have a great day.
The end.